Today, we will be taking a look at the 2024 presidential election based on the newest 538 polling averages in all 50 states. Before we get started, please make sure to subscribe to my channel for more election content and election predictions. Let's start by taking a look at who is favored to win the 2024 election. According to 538 election simulations, Harris wins 57 times out of 100 compared to Trump's 43. Taking a look at the national polls, we see that Harris leads by 3.2%. This is a pretty good lead considering her late start due to Biden dropping out, but we really have to dive into these states to see how the 2024 election will play out. We will start by filling out the solid states for each candidate. These are states that candidates are expected to win by 15% or more in the 2024 election. For Kamala Harris, those states would be California, Oregon, Washington, Illinois, New York, Vermont, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Maryland, Delaware, the District of Columbia, and Hawaii. For Donald Trump, his solid states would be Utah, Wyoming, Idaho, Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, Missouri, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, South Carolina, Kentucky, West Virginia, Indiana, Ohio, and Iowa, as well as Alaska. With the solid states filled out, it brings Kamala Harris up to 166 electoral votes to Donald Trump's 146 electoral votes. Moving on to the likely states for each candidate. These are states that will go to each candidate by around 10% or a little less. For Kamala Harris, she will likely win the state of New Hampshire as well as Maine's congressional districts. She will also likely win the states of New Jersey, Virginia, Colorado, and New Mexico. All of these states she leads by around 10% in the polls. Moving on to the likely state for Donald Trump. Trump will likely win the state of Texas. He leads by around 10% in the polls here, and he also carried this state by 6% back in 2020 during a COVID-19 pandemic. Moving on to the lean states for each candidate. These are states that candidates are expected to win by around 3 to 8% according to the polls. For Kamala Harris, Minnesota will be a lean Democrat in the 2024 presidential election. Taking a look at the polls in Minnesota, according to 538, Kamala Harris is leading by 7.7%, which is a very strong margin. Minnesota has voted Democrat in the past 40 years, and there's no reason it won't do so again. Wisconsin will also be lean Democrat in the 2024 election, according to 538. Taking a look at the polls in Wisconsin, we see that Kamala Harris leads by 3.5%. This is a smaller lead than her lead in Minnesota, but she should still be able to carry the state as she is gaining more momentum from campaigning and rallying, especially in these key swing states. The state of Michigan will also be lean Democrat in the 2024 election. Taking a look at the polls in Michigan, we see that Kamala Harris leads by 2.4%. This is a smaller lead than many of her leads in other key swing states like Wisconsin and Minnesota, but keep in mind that Michigan has voted pretty Democratic in the past, besides for Trump in the 2016 election. According to 538, 2.4% is a lean margin, and as our election prediction is solidly based on the polls today, Kamala Harris will win Michigan by a lean margin in the 2024 election. Moving on to the lean states for Donald Trump. Florida will be lean Donald Trump in the 2024 election. Taking a look at the polls in Florida, we see that Donald Trump leads by 4.3%. As his home state, Trump won Florida in both 2020 and in 2016. However, unlike many other states in the nation, Florida actually shifted right in 2020 compared to in 2016 when Trump won it against Clinton. Since then, the Republicans have just been performing very good in Florida, and Florida will go to Donald Trump by a lean margin, according to the 538 polling averages. As we move into the final states that will decide the 2024 election, Kamala Harris stands at 250 electoral votes to Donald Trump's 218 electoral votes. Moving on to the tilt states for each candidate. These are states that will go to candidates by a very slight margin, which is considered less than 2% in 538. Starting with the state of Nevada. Nevada will be tilt Harris in the 2024 election. Taking a look at the polls in Nevada, we see that Kamala Harris leads by 1.1%. This state did vote for Biden in 2020, and Harris maintains a lead in the polls in 538. 1.1% is considered a tilt margin, even though it is a bigger lead than some of the other states we're about to take a look at, such as Georgia and Arizona, where the polls really go down to the wire. Speaking of Arizona, we will now be taking a look at Arizona and its 11 electoral votes. Taking a look at the polls in Arizona, we see that Harris leads by 0.2%. This is the closest state in the 2024 election, and its 11 electoral votes are crucial to every single candidate. We see, according to 538, that Harris will win this state by 0.2%, which is again classified in the tilt margin. With Arizona and its 11 electoral votes, it brings Kamala Harris's total up to 267 to Donald Trump's 218 electoral votes. Moving on to the key swing state of Pennsylvania. Taking a look at the polls in Pennsylvania, we see that Kamala Harris leads by 1.3%. Out of all of the swing states, Pennsylvania is crucial to both Harris and Trump. As of now, Harris is leading, but things could very much so change as we still have 2 months before the actual election, with 2 presidential debates and 1 vice presidential debate yet to be done. But as of now, Pennsylvania will go to Harris by a tilt margin in the 2024 election, according to 538. This brings her total up to 286 electoral votes, which will secure her the presidency in 2024. Moving on to the state of Maine. Maine's 1 electoral vote will go to Kamala Harris, bringing her total up to 287 electoral votes to Donald Trump's 218 electoral votes. The 2nd Congressional District of Nebraska will also go to Harris by a tilt margin, adding another electoral vote to her total. Moving on to the state of Georgia. Taking a look at the polls in Georgia, we see that Harris leads by 0.4%. Georgia, along with Arizona, are the 2 closest states in the 2024 presidential election. In 2020, Biden flipped the state of Georgia by a very slight margin of 0.2%. And taking a look at the polls today, 538 has Harris on track to win Georgia again by a very slight margin. In the end, we just have to see how the election plays out in the last 2 months, but as of now, Georgia will be going to Kamala Harris by a tilt margin. And our final state in the 2024 election, the state of North Carolina. Taking a look at the polls in North Carolina, we see that Trump is leading by 0.4%. Trump won the state in both 2020 and in 2016, and he now maintains a slight lead over Harris. Like Georgia and Arizona, North Carolina is just one of these swing states that we just don't know who will win until the actual election. Right now, Trump leads by 0.4%, but anything could happen in these last 2 months before the election. But as of now, Donald Trump will win North Carolina by a very slight margin, making the final electoral count 304 for Kamala Harris and 234 for Donald Trump. This is the 2024 presidential election based on polling averages in all 50 states from 538. Please note that this is an election prediction based on polling averages, and anything could happen in the actual 2024 election. If you made it to here, please subscribe to my channel for more election content and more election predictions. Thank you for watching.